Gopi Janavala Kiriparatari Yasodanandana Prachujana Ranjana Yasodanandana Prachujana Ranjana Amunatira Panachari Amunatira Panachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Radha Madhava Radhe. Radha Madhava Radhe. Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Kishore Kishori Ki Jai Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani Ki Jai Gaunitai Ki Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're in the beginning of the chapter entitled The History of Kaliya. And today we are covering two verses, text 4 and text 5. So text 5 is on the boards, and that's the one with the purport. And I'll read text 4 and then we'll proceed to text 5. So text 4. Vishavirya madavishtaha kadraveyastu kaliyaha kandarti krit garudam swayam tam bupaje balim. And the translation for text 4. Although all the other serpents were dutifully making offerings to Garuda, one serpent, the arrogant Kaliya, son of Kadru, would eat all these offerings before Garuda could claim them. Thus Kaliya directly defied the carrier of Lord Vishnu. And text 5, which you can chant responsibly. Takshritva kupito rajan Bhagavan Bhagavat Priyaha Vijikam Sur Mahavagaha Kaliyam Samupadravat Takshritva Kupito Rajan Bhagavan Bhagavat Priyaha Vijikam Sur Mahavagaha Kaliyam Samupravat Padravat, sorry. Sakshritva Kupito Rajan Bhagavan Bhagavat Priyaha Vikicham Sur Mahavega Kaliyam Samupadravat Kamshutva Kupito Rajan Bhagavan Bhagavat Priyaha Vijiham Sur Mahavega Kaliyam Samupadravat. Anybody else like to chant? Sakshritva Kupito Rajan Bhagavan Bhagavat Priyaha Gitam Sur Mahavega Kaliyam Samupadravat. One more. Sakshritva Kupito Rajan Bhagavan Bhagavan Priyaha Vijiham Sur Mahavega Liyam Samupradravat. Say the word for word for text 5. Tat, that. Shrutva, hearing. Kupita, angered. Rajan, O king. Bhagavan, the powerful Garuda. Bhagavat Priyaha, the dear devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vijighamsaha, desiring to kill. Mahavegaha, the greatly swift. Kaliyam, to Kaliya. Samupadravat, he rushed. And the translation. O king, the greatly powerful Garuda, who is very dear to the Supreme Lord, became angry when he heard of this. Desiring to kill Kaliya, he rushed towards the serpent with tremendous speed. And the purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Sanatana Goswami explains that the word Mahavega indicates that the great speed of Garuda cannot be checked by anyone. So one line purport. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Padaswami Tinamine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschija Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hey Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So interestingly enough, the text 4, which in the Bhagavatam doesn't have a purport, is commented on by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So I'm going to look at that. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes that not only did Kaliya not offer his share to Garuda, and the verse we read, the translation said all the other serpents were dutifully making offerings to Garuda. He also ate all the other offerings meant for Garuda. So there were two reasons then that it could be said that Kaliya was directly disrespecting Garuda, the bearer of Lord Vishnu. He's referred to as Katati Kritya. So Garuda came to know of these acts on the part of Kaliya from the other serpents on the Ramanaka island. The other serpents actually informed Garuda about Kaliya's arrogant behavior, as stated by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. That's from Sarata Darshini. So Garuda received message that this was the behavior that Kaliya was indulging in, refusing to make his share of an offering to Garuda, and also directly eating the offerings that the other serpents had made, so not even waiting for Garuda to take those offerings. Lord Krishna uses two adjectives to describe entities who, were they to perform a sacrifice, so we're taking that Garuda's not, Kaliya's not performing a sacrifice. So were he to perform a sacrifice, one could say, this is Lord Krishna describing in Bhagavad Gita, he would do so without following any rules and regulations. So this is taken, and the adjectives used by Lord Krishna to describe persons who are basically disregarding of any kind of sacrifice being made with the intention to please him, Lord Krishna. He uses these adjectives: always impudent, deluded by wealth and false prestige. So that's from Bhagavad Gita 16:17. So Srila Prabhupada builds on this description by saying, and this is how Srila Prabhupada is elaborating on these adjectives used by Lord Krishna: thinking themselves all in all, not caring for any authority or scripture, the demoniacs sometimes perform so-called religious or sacrificial rites, and since they do not believe in any authority, they are very impudent. So that's the fundamental problem. There isn't a belief in any higher authority. And so we can take it that this is the belief by which Kaliya is operating. And Srila Prabhupada gives the reason for this impudence, because that's the adjective used by Lord Krishna to describe persons in this category of not caring for any authority, holding this kind of belief system. He says, illusion, so there's a reason for the impudence. Illusion caused by accumulating some wealth and false prestige. So there's a description of Kaliya, which bears out this point of impudence even further. So I'm quoting. This is from early on in the Bhagavatam. His coils tormented by the expanding body of the Lord, Kaliya released him. In great anger, the serpent then raised his hoods high and stood still, breathing heavily. His nostrils appeared like vessels for cooking poison, and the staring eyes in his face like thunderclouds. Thus the serpent looked at the Lord. So see the impudence. He's directly face to face with Lord Krishna, the supreme authority, and the eyes are burning with anger. So the serpent looked at the Supreme Lord with a glance that was filled with terrible, poisonous fire. So one could say that Kaliya certainly didn't know what was needed to be done in the face of the Supreme Authority, and certainly he was directly in the presence of the Supreme Lord. So it's very graphic, the particular adjectives used by Lord Krishna for an entity who doesn't hold the belief system of there being a supreme authority. It's complete impudence. He's directly staring at Lord Krishna with a glance full of terrible, poisonous fire. So carrying on from Bhagavad Gita, just to paint this picture of Kaliya's particular position. So this is Lord Krishna speaking in Bhagavad Gita 16:18, describing persons with this kind of belief system and this kind of impudence. Bewildered by false ego, strength, pride, lust, and anger, the demons become envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in their own bodies and in the bodies of others, and blasphemes against the real religion. Srila Baladev Vijayabhusan, he writes on this particular verse where Srila Prabhupada, Lord Krishna is describing persons who are very envious of him. And he says that the demoniac, instead of taking shelter of the supreme authority, they're taking shelter of a false ego. So some ideas they hold of themselves that aren't in relation to the supreme authority, so the false ego. They take shelter of their strength, or they take shelter of their pride, or they take shelter of lust, or they take shelter of anger. And this manifests as disrespect to Lord Krishna. So one can see that in Kaliya's case, what's visible is he's certainly taken shelter of anger. And I'll come to a little bit later what other aspects he's taking shelter of. But he's directly disrespecting Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna describes himself as being the controller and maintainer in all bodies. So it means he's also present in Kaliya's body. And in fact, in the bodies of every single person with this kind of belief system that's opposed to there being a supreme authority. And indeed, persons falling into this category with this kind of belief system commit violence on other bodies and on their own. So this was actually the case because for Kaliya, he had poisoned water And this very water that he poisoned by all this anger and venom he was holding um, was drunk by the cowherd boys and the cows. And so this idea that they're committing, that such an entity is committing violence to the bodies of others is actually borne out very graphically, because as soon as the cowherd boys and the cows just touched the water, and they lost consciousness. Um, in fact, they actually fell lifeless at the water's edge. So powerful was this anger and this venom that Kalia was holding, that this idea of violence being committed to others was very intense, that just by touching, so not even touching him, but touching the water that he poisoned by his anger and his venom, it brought about lifelessness in the bodies of the cows and the cowherd boys. So Srila Prabhupada, he makes a further generalization about entities in this category. The impudent, holding this belief system of there not being a supreme authority. So this is Srila Prabhupada's words. And Srila Prabhupada's very interesting because he always graphically describes the thought process in generalized terms. So here's him describing the thought process of such a person. He thinks himself independent and powerful in every action. He thinks no one can equal him in strength, in power, or wealth. He can act in any way and no one can stop him. In fact, such an entity, so that was the quote, I should end it there. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so taking what Srila Prabhupada has graphically put as the sort of general thought pattern of an entity who's not looking to there being a supreme authority, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually summarizes it very clearly in the case of Kaliya. He says, Kaliya is the personification of malice. So such ill feeling towards others. Then we come to the response of Garuda. So there's a picture painted of Kaliya's position. And text 5 is describing the response of Garuda. And this is the individual who was to have been the recipient of offerings given by other serpents. So how that whole scenario worked is that Lord Brahma had made an arrangement whereby Garuda wouldn't disturb the Nagalaya community of serpents, because Garuda used to come there because he, not being vegetarian and his natural food stuff, he would come to the Nagalaya community and he would kill some serpents, and sometimes it might even be that he would kill someone that he didn't consume. So the serpents were extremely disturbed. And in order for them not to have to live in this kind of anxiety and sense of their habitat and their beings being disturbed, they had asked Vasuki to speak to Lord Brahma, and hence Lord Brahma had made this arrangement that on every half moon day, an offering of a serpent would be made so that Garuda wouldn't disturb the community. And last week, His Holiness Ramapada Swami was explaining that actually there would be items such as fruits and flowers, etc., that were also part of the offering that would have been extracted from other offerings they were making. So in fact, Garuda was getting a very comfortable, generous offering. And this offering was to be kept at the base of the banyan tree as the sacrificial offering to Garuda. And Garuda himself was extremely satisfied with the offering. It was quite in order for him. And but what happened was that Kalia, over time, observing these offerings, he chose to eat the offerings that were meant for Lord Vishnu's carrier Garuda. And now we're reading that Garuda is coming to crush Kalia's pride. Because this is the other thing that Kalia took shelter of. Not only was there anger, there was great pride. And Kalia had made it his abode, this part that is further along in the story, where just touching on how it is that his particular anger or that he'd taken shelter of was visible. It was much later on in the story where here we're reading the interaction that's going to lead to the fight between Garuda and Kalia, and then Kalia has to flee. So Kalia then had fled to a particular lake, a sort of tributary, one could say, of the Yamuna River, and it was in that particular place that the cowherd boys and the cows had been rendered lifeless by the anger and the venom of Kalia. But here, this section is dealing with how it led up to that point. So, so Srila Sanatana Goswami, these are his words. He was quoted in the purport for text 5. So I'm going to read his very brief description of both these events, the prior that we're reading now of the interaction between Kalia and Garuda, and then the later. This is how Srila Sanatana Goswami puts it. Kalia had eaten the offerings meant for your carrier Garuda, and Garuda had crushed Kalia's pride. Kalia had then made his abode in this lake, declared off limits to Garuda by Subari, and you saved that lake, referring to Lord Krishna. So this is Srila Sanatana Goswami, just this simple description of two very elaborate pastimes. That's from Krishna Lila Stava. So what we're looking at here is that pride of Kalia. And here is what his pride is based on. So this is what he's taking shelter of, and it's very interesting. He takes shelter of the volume of poison that he'd accumulated. Very interesting. And he's also taking shelter of his material powers. So we know that he had 100 heads, so there's a huge amount of strength in his coils. And he's very proud, both of that strength and the amount of poison he's accumulated, and taken into account the earlier description where Lord Krishna puts into perspective what the position is of somebody who's not looking to him as the supreme authority. We can actually see it that this is an indication of the great misfortune of this entity, that he'd accumulated so much poison and so much anger and so much venom. But in his case, because of the belief system he's holding, he's extremely proud of the fact that he's accumulated such a volume of poison. Very interesting. And so he's observing these sacrifices, and then this thought comes. So we heard how Srila Prabhupada describes the thinking process of somebody who's not looking to supreme authority, being very impudent. So this is Kalia's actual thought. And this is Srila Prabhupada writing from Krishna book. He says, why should Garuda be offered this sacrifice? So challenging spirit. And so taking Srila Sanatana Goswami's point that at this moment in time, Kaliya's pride has to be crushed by Garuda. So here we're just beginning reading how this pride of Kaliya is going to be crushed. And this is the description from the verse we read. The greatly powerful Garuda, who is very dear to the Supreme Lord, became angry when he heard of this, meaning the offering has been eaten. Desiring to kill Kaliya, he rushed towards the serpent with tremendous speed. So this is the immediate response of Garuda. That's from text 5. So the response of Garuda to come to Ramanaka Island at such a speed that it couldn't be checked by anyone, it's a response that's pretty natural for such a close servant of the Supreme Lord. And certainly it's natural when one has the fundamental understanding that nobody except the Lord is the proprietor of anything. So this is the belief system of Garuda. And naturally, if one is holding such a belief that nobody is the proprietor of anything except the Supreme Lord, then there's an implication to that belief. And the implication is that one should accept only those things that are set by the Lord aside for him as his quota. And that's, we know from Sri Upanishad, everything animate and inanimate that is within this universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one must not accept other things knowing well to whom they belong. So you can see that this belief system doesn't feature in the mindset of a person who doesn't have the concept of a supreme authority. So therefore, Kaliya can feel free. Oh, why should Garuda get these offerings? I'll take them. Because there isn't the understanding of the broader picture that everything's owned by the Supreme Lord and one has one's own particular quota that has been set aside for one. So he traversed the boundaries and took the quota that belonged to Garuda. And that was Ishvasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena chyaktena punjita ma grita kasya svitanam. So Srila Prabhupada writes that the Supreme Being, the absolute personality of Godhead, being the complete person, so he's satisfied in all respects, he has the complete and perfect intelligence to adjust everything by his different potencies. And he remains the ultimate controller, sustainer, and dictator over everything. So very broad statements. So the fact that the Supreme Lord has this complete and perfect intelligence to adjust everything by his different potencies, those potencies get described by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, how they work. So this is slightly technical, but it's very good to look at it since we're looking at this issue that Kaliya is now in opposition to Garuda and how it plays itself out. So this is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He says that all kinds of relationships manifest from Lord Krishna's Sandini aspect, meaning his eternity aspect, Sat, and from his Samvit aspect, his Chit aspect or knowledge. So the practical application of knowledge is Jnana and Vijnana, meaning knowledge and realized knowledge. So when the Samvit and the Sandini, meaning the eternity and the knowledge aspect interact, that's when emotions appear. So we heard Garuda was experiencing a particular emotion. It was anger, such that it propelled him to swoop immediately, just coming to kill Garuda. So this is that knowledge interacting with the eternity aspect. He's a very close servant of Lord Krishna. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he writes that without the presence of emotion, existence would not be known. And he generalizes, this is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I'm quoting, all the emotions of Vaikuntha are created by the samvit aspect or spiritual potency. So for Garuda, the knowledge came to him. He's been informed by all the other serpents. Oh, this offering is being consumed by Kaliya. So immediately spiritual anger arises because that's what happens. The knowledge interacts with the eternity factor, the samvit with the sandini, and so he comes to experience this emotion which arises from the knowledge of the transgression of Kaliya, taking more than his quota. So this brings to mind the idea of attachment. So now, there has to be attachment in serving Lord Krishna, and Garuda is serving Lord Vishnu. He's a very close, intimate associate. So this is interesting, again, looking how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes these kind of spiritual emotions and how it's connected to attachment. So the characteristic, this is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the characteristic of somebody who's awakened raga or faith, or even pure faith, as in the case of Garuda, their particular characteristic is that of always being pure and faultless. So this is putting Garuda into the correct slot and what his anger represents. So one can take it always pure and faultless because there's that strong faith. That's what pure faith does, makes all one's activities and actions and emotions pure and faultless. So there's a thread of bondage between the heart and where it's reposited, or one's emotions where they're reposited. And there's a sense of pleasure. So that's that thread of bondage between the heart of the entity and where it's reposited, meaning the Supreme Lord. And this binds both parties. So in fact, a living entity who has attachment, this could be present as pure spiritual attachment, such as in the case of Garuda, or it could be some sort of impure mental attachment, like one has got some faith, but it's not completely reposed in the Supreme Lord. And interestingly enough, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur looks at this idea that there's, just some sort of faith that's still not completely fixed on the Supreme Lord. So there's some just mental attachment. And he actually says that faith is considered pure, whether it's complete attachment or even if it's just the beginning of faith, because that faith, because the repository is the Supreme Lord, it's equally pure. So, and the reason is because the repository is the Supreme Lord. So as soon as attachment turns towards the spiritual world or Vaikuntha, then what happens is that attachment to the material world, it doesn't actually remain. And why this is so is that even the objects that one accepts on the material plane, they become transcendental. So Kaliya is in that position where he doesn't have any faith at all. So he doesn't have this idea of the supreme object. There isn't the heart connection where emotions are being reposited on the Supreme Lord. So what he does is filled with faults. Garuda, on the other hand, where he's exhibiting anger, going to kill Kaliya, his emotions are considered pure and faultless because everything is reposed, his faith is reposed on the Supreme Lord, Lord Vishnu. Um, so if, on the other hand, one were to accept material objects, so this is somebody who's got some faith that there is a supreme being, and there's some impure motive with which one accepts material objects, that's when faithlessness starts growing. So this is the fine line that one treads if one is taking to the belief system that there's a supreme Lord who's in control of everything. So because of this purity of some attachment to the Supreme Lord, just because of some faith, it means that it almost becomes impossible for devotees to act sinfully. This is how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains it. Because the root cause of sinful desire is identifying with one's body as oneself. So one can see the extremely sinful route that it took for Kaliya, identifying with his body. Oh, my great strength, my many heads, my many coils, and oh, look at this vast amount of poison I've accumulated. So this is the root cause, that kind of identifying with the material body. It's the root cause of sinful desire. So you can see how gradually over time, Kaliya went that route of sinful desire. Oh, I'm going to take these offerings that are for Garuda. So, of course, both sin and piety are relative, and they're not part of one's constitution, because that was the description that Lord Krishna gave of himself, that an entity who doesn't see him as the supreme controller is actually not seeing that he's present within their body and in the body of everybody else. So by constitution, one is to serve the supreme being. And so if one is not going the route of serving, that means that the sinful desires could also take the form of being pious desires, but it remains sinful because it's not in relation to the Supreme Lord. So when devotional service to Lord Krishna, that's one's constitutional position, is cultivated, then that darkness, which is the root cause of sin and piety, is gradually freed and abolished. So we read in the previous chapter actually how that took place for Kaliya, where he actually got beaten into submission. He had to get beaten, like literally mangled. His body got mangled, that body that he was so proud of, in order to be able to come to this position, his more constitutional position, where this kind of darkness of taking shelter of his pride and his physical prowess and the poison he had actually got pushed aside in order for him to actually be able to bow his head of his own volition to the Supreme Lord. So these are some thoughts on these two short verses. If there's any thoughts to contribute to the discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Hare Krishna Mataji. The response of Garuda towards Kaliya in anger because the offerings were taken by Kaliya. Why? Let me elaborate. I'm sorry. I don't know if we should take them as attachment towards material things. I think is my very, very humble opinion that he's responding towards the in gratitude to the devotees that are recognizing his labor of love towards Vishnu than attachment. Am I clear?
Not completely.
I'm sorry.
Try wording it in a question.
No, the thing is that I don't have, you know what? Go ahead and let me elaborate because,
Right.
yeah. Just go ahead.
Or no? Okay. I haven't fully organized my thoughts, but one thing I can say that you made a lot of wonderful points. That's why it makes so hard to organize the thoughts because you have many points. And but my pre-question is the verse you quoted earlier. The verse went something to the extent like people who blaspheme against the real religion, envious. I believe that's from the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, Daksha pastime. Or can you let me know what verse that is from? Or do you know which?
Oh, I was quoting from
Yeah.
Bhagavad Gita.
No, blasphemy against the real religion. Those, you quoted a verse, I believe it was from the Bhagavatam. Those who blaspheme against the real religion, who are envious of their own bodies and the bodies of others.
Oh, actually, no, that was
The fourth.
purport of Srila Prabhupada commenting on that verse of Bhagavad Gita. So that was actually Srila Prabhupada,
Oh, that's from the Gita.
his wording.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, I thought, okay. Um, you were mentioning, let's see some of the points. Like I said, I'm pretty disorganized in my thoughts. You were mentioning that Kalia was one who didn't follow any rules and regulations, something to that extent. He was very demoniac. And it's ironic because we see in this passage, I think it's coming up in the next verse or so, where Sobari Muni is accusing Guru of the same thing. But I really appreciated your point of since Garuda had pure faith in the Lord, he was faultless. And because Sobari Muni, I think, is accusing Garuda of you're not following any rules and regulations. You know, we have so many wonderful, prasadam, puri, sabjis. Why are you eating fish and snakes? And this brings to mind of many points in the Bhagavatam, one in the Daksha pastime, where Daksha accused Lord Shiva, you're not following the rules and regulations. You're very impure. And he was criticizing Lord Shiva. He was thinking, how's a homeless-looking person, somebody who covers his body in ashes, who's very dirty, how does he have a better seat at an arena more than me? And so in that pastime, I think it's the fourth canto, fourth chapter of verse 19, Prabhupada mentions that sometimes great transcendentals, they're above the rules and regulations. Just like one example I appreciate is that parents teach their children to follow the rules of the road. If you run a red light, you'll get a ticket. But then the children may see, oh, the police, the ambulance, the fire trucks, they're breaking the law, they're running the red light. But they're authorized to run a red light. Why? Because they care more about humanity than those who are following the rules and regulations. And so we see throughout the Bhagavatam, there's so many pastimes. People criticize great transcendentals, they're not following the rules and regulations. And one thing I appreciate about the Daksha pastime is that he had purity on the outside, but no purity on the inside. And Shiva was the complete opposite. And we see that if we want to clean our clothes, we purchase bleach or soap. What we see, it's obvious. In order to clean a mind, you can't just purchase bleach or soap and put it in a washing machine. You need Krishna Yadi Kripa Kade Konya Bhagavane Guru Ansayami Rupe Shikoya Pane. You need the Kripa Shakti of Guru and Krishna. And still even chanting Krishna. So my question is that regarding the Sobari Muni pastime, I think Bhakti Josh quoted a verse. I think it's from the Narada Pancharatra, but it's quoted in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's a verse that says, Sarvopadi Virnimuktam, Tat Padatwena Nirmanam Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhaktir Uchate. One should give up all false designations. And one designation that Sobari Muni had was I'm a pure renunciate. He was pure one day, but because he criticized Garuda, he was a pervert the next day. He married 50 women and so my question is, what are some steps we could take to give up even a false designation that I'm pure and I'm the owner of purity? Just like you were mentioning, Garuda says we're not the owners of anything. And there's a nice quote by Radhanath Maharaj. He says, Srila Prabhupada was once asked by a devotee for permission to renounce everything. Srila Prabhupada's response was, Krishna owns everything. So what do you have to renounce? The only thing you have to renounce is the misconception that you have something to renounce. So that was my question, like, how can we give it the understanding that we're pure or we're the owners of purity? Yes, that's nice, but the next day we see it happens all the time, so.
Your question is separate from the examples you were giving, and particularly of Sir Bari Muni, that how does one give up this idea that one is pure or has purity? So, well, that's that's an interesting concept to hold. I mean, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his analysis, he's actually saying that as long as one has attachment to the Supreme Lord, then it's actually one's desires are not actually sinful because one is reposing one's attachment on the Supreme Lord. So the desires are getting spiritualized by virtue of the fact that there's attachment for the Supreme Lord. So your question is looking at if one were to view oneself as being pure. Well, I mean, there is purity by virtue of the fact that one is cultivating service for the Supreme Lord. That is a very pure, transcendental activity. And but one has to, at the same time, cultivate one's consciousness. So it's not that the activity is performed, but it remains separate from the activity. There has to be emotional involvement in the activity. So if there isn't emotional involvement in the activity, one could say, oh, I am pure because the activity is pure. But if one's involving oneself emotionally, then one comes to understand that one's mind may actually be a major enemy in the whole process of trying to perform the service. So that's an easy indicator of where one's purity lies, just by how much the mind is fighting with one's attempts to perform service. So it becomes very graphic because the mind has a life of its own. So that's the barometer for one's purity. But the actual act of attempting to serve the Supreme Lord, that is pure. It's extremely pure. But one's consciousness needs to be attended to and cultivated as one's going through the serving. So one has to monitor that. So yeah, the barometer is very easy and graphic to recognize where one's, you could say how pure one is or isn't because of the fact that the mind has its own life and its particular tendencies. All right, thank you.
I asked my question. I appreciate your answer, but can I ask it in another way also? Actually, you answered it, but maybe you could answer another aspect of this question. Going back to my original point also, that I didn't make it that clear probably. Like I said, a child criticizes the fireman, the police officers. So sometimes in our standards, in our society, we may criticize somebody. Here's the rules and regulations I was taught from the Vedas. And I see somebody else is not following those rules and regulations. But we see that a doctor, he'll prescribe, let's say, diabetes medicines for somebody. And so then this person may say, oh, these are my rules and regulations to remain pure. Oh, you should take diabetes medicines too. But I have a different disease. And you said there was many different forms of faith. There's a verse that says, Shraddhavan jana hoibati adhikari uttama madhya kanishta shraddha anusari. That are, like you said, our faith is, our faith is varies, and sometimes the rules and regulations may vary according to our faith, according to what Diksha Guru. And so sometimes maybe in a society we criticize others. Oh, you should follow this aspect of the scriptures, but yes, but I'm not at that faith. So my question is, how to avoid? We see this criticism. Oh, I'm more pure than order. I'm following these rules and regulations. Yes, this is right for you, but at this moment, my faith is at this level. So this, aspect is maybe accordance with me. And to give up the notion to criticize others, oh, I'm following the rules more than you. I'm more pure than you. And then we see, but it's not so easy to, like I said, to get rid of the lust, the envy. You can't just buy a pine saw and get rid of it. You need the mercy, and we see that so many fall downs because of that in the scriptures and in our lives.
So the second question was to do with not making comparisons with others regarding their level of purity and the extent to which they're following rules and regulations. Well, I mean, a critical tendency may be an aspect of the mind. So, one becomes alert to that and doesn't allow for that tendency to go out of control. There's healthy assessment of something, and then there's unhealthy where one does an assessment but then goes into whatever the particular pattern in one's own mind is. If that patterns all take different shapes and forms, but if one gets caught in one's own pattern and interprets everything one sees in the world according to the pattern in the mind, that's clearly losing a healthy objective or assessment of something. So that's when it's useful to have a friend in Krishna consciousness who can point out to one that one's going the route of the pattern in one's mind and is losing proper perspective. So, in the case of Subari Muni, he made a major error because he had a personal sympathy for the fish. So he thought he was performing a very noble act by prohibiting Garuda from coming to the area of the fish, that the fish would be protected. But in actual fact, because Garuda is such completely attached to the Supreme Lord personality, he was actually committing an offense by inhibiting him from being able to take what he needed to eat, prohibiting him from his quota. So Subari Muni made a terrible error of judgment. So, so one sometimes needs help with how one makes one's judgment. So a good friend is necessary, a Krishna conscious friend. So that's a response. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.